Let me give you a hypothetical. You're playing a fighter, a barbarian, a monk, or hell, maybe even a ranger. Your general strategy consists of running up to the nearest enemy and hitting them, and then repeating until combat is over. Sure, you can do things like grapple, shove, dodge, but your options are painfully limited and only marginally improved if you're a ranger or a few specific subclasses such as the Battlemaster Fighter. A Spellcaster, on the other hand, has their pick of damage, defense, and utility baked right into the core of their class. They can take their pick and usually change them up on a much more regular basis. Sure, this dichotomy generally makes classes that are easier to play than others, and that's great for introducing beginners to the game. But for those who know how to play and are looking for some complexity to spice up their martials and even casters to some degree, both in and out of combat, some additional options would go a long way. How are we going to find these options, you might ask? Well, for that we have to go back in time to another edition of Dungeons & Dragons. To find exploits of all shapes and sizes, we need to go back to 4th edition. 4th edition gets a lot of flack for what it did. I never played it, but I've worked on the internet long enough to get a general idea of what people didn't like about it. It balanced all of the powers to each other so that the martial abilities were about as strong as the magical ones. It had a ton of class options, but each one was a reskin of a specific role. It felt too much like a video game to run at a table, and the technology where it could run at maximum smoothness and efficiency was a couple years too late before a large portion of the community condemned the system, either going back to 3.5 or moving on to other systems like Pathfinder. For all the flack it gets, though, 4E made some fantastic changes that would end up being in the bones of 5th edition, and there are a few things people often go back to and take for their games. We're going to look at one of those systems that didn't make it, but someone has gone back to painstakingly convert. Martial Exploits is a document on the DM's Guild by Damian Steele, or DM Steele as he goes by. It's a conversion of nearly 900 martial abilities from 4th edition into 5th edition, covering powers from the Fighter, Rogue, Ranger, and Warlord. These exploits are divided by rank, and each rank is about equivalent to a spell of the same level, with the max rank being 5. You gain access to each rank at about the speed of a half-caster getting access to spells, while the martial exploits are more accessible and could theoretically be learned by anyone since everyone uses weapons to some degree. After releasing it, DM Steele went on to do arcane, divine, primal, and psionic exploits as well, covering the full spectrum for anyone who'd want to have these abilities. They have a recharge rate of short rest, long rest, or some have turn, as some of them were able to be used every turn. Given that the exploits cover basically the entire game system, they're an all-encompassing selection of mostly limited use abilities. So what can you do with these as a player? Well, the short answer is a lot. I've made this comparison before, but you could have a group of champion fighters, even a group of them that are using the same weapon, and have them play out completely differently. You want to maximize your damage output, either in big burst damage or consistently across an entire combat? Well, you can do that. You want to be a big burly source of crowd control and debuffs? You can do that. You want to be a tanky juggernaut or protector of your squishy friends? You can do that too. Hell, you want to do some stuff out of combat? They have that too. And these are all just rank 1. These options get better and better as you level up. Depending on what you select, if you flavor it with some detailed description, it can really color your characters and how they look while fighting. Let me give you some examples.
糸の匂い死の型打ちよ雷の呼吸一の型霹靂一閃
See, and that's for everybody. Some classes have more specific things than others. The Ranger had their Animal Companion exploits brought over. Rogue has some sneak attack specific exploits. Barbarians, who are a primal class in 4th edition, have some special rages in their primal exploits. I could go super in-depth onto each power source and choice examples from each, but I'd be here for hours if I did. So, that's about what the exploits can do for players, but they're not the only ones who get to enjoy the fun. There are a lot of uses for exploits for DMs. The most obvious, of course, is having some of your enemies use them on your players, but there is some consideration to be made for how your players get access to exploits in the first place. The easiest way is to use feats, or if you use the things I use, talent points from the talent trees. I have a video up on that as well. What you can also do is give them out for rewards. Depending on the story, an NPC can teach them an exploit, or they can find some kind of manual for teaching them. Keep in mind that the exploits can add levels of power not unlike magic items of varying rarities, so you do need to account for that when people learn them. You could also make trainers that take gold in exchange to teach players exploits. Make it a gold sink because it ends up being a worthwhile investment and something generally always available as long as they have gold. That's not even mentioning what you can do to enemies. Add some cool techniques to spice up published monsters that ended up being a bit bare bones. Add a flashy technique or two to a mini-boss or a boss fight. Show off the pure flashiness of your NPC by having them use the exploits that they'll have available to teach later on. You can give the same kind of unique expression of style that the players had in an NPC while showing the players something that's attainable themselves if you want to make it available to them. The ranks are equivalent to spell levels, so theoretically, you could use them as early as you could use up to 5th level spells, as early as CR6 of Wizards of the Coast is to be believed. Cone of Cold against a bunch of level 60s is gonna hurt like hell. Use your best judgment for balancing. But now that I've gone through everything I like about the exploits, it's time to talk about some of the pitfalls. When used as written with short and long rest system of exploits, if you only have a couple, even if they're style defining exploits, they tend not to feel as impactful because you can only use them a couple of times in an adventuring day. If you give them too many though, they will run through any encounter you throw at them. There are additions to the base game that you will be adding on, so you have to account for their use in balancing encounters in the structure of the overall game. Personally, I've tried a couple different methods for balancing, letting the players use and have a lot of them. The first was letting players only have and prepare a number of them equal to their proficiency bonus. This was an okay fix, letting them have access to only 3 of them if they were, say, level 5. It somewhat ran into the same issue early on where they only had a few options throughout an adventuring day, and I came up with another system that I think works better but still might need some fine-tuning. With this system, the player characters are given an additional resource, action points. They have a number of them equal to twice their level. They regain all of them once they finish a long rest, and their proficiency bonus in them when they finish a short rest. They can use exploits using action points, taking the rank in action points for an exploit that recharges on a short rest, double the rank in action points for an exploit that recharges on a long rest, and no points for exploits that are turn-based because they were balanced around always being able to use them anyway. So a rank 1 exploit would cost 1 point if it was short and 2 points if it was long. A rank 2 would cost 2 points if it was short, 4 points if it was long, and so on. The recharge rate of the exploits have been altered to facilitate this. They can only be used once per combat encounter, but they can be used in multiple encounters across an adventuring day regardless of their regular recharge rate. They do have to adhere to their recharge rate when used outside of combat encounters. The action point method is the one I use now and the one I enjoy the most. Now, even if someone goes all in and uses every method available to load up on exploits for their character, they have a certain amount they can use per day. There's a recharge rate per short rest that alleviates this, sure, but when groups are taking 2 to 3 short rests, and that's a lot, they won't get enough points back to completely unbalance an encounter unless, of course, they're saving up everything until the last fight, which is a common enough thing players do that you should already be accounting for that if you're noting your players doing it. I like this method. A large criticism of 5e is that all the martial classes should have had Battlemaster maneuvers, and this gives those in a way. This gives you a huge amount of things for martial characters to do that aren't just hitting, and adds a lot of variety even to the half-casters whose spell lists tend to be pretty limited in comparison to full. I personally don't do this as I haven't had a huge reason to yet, but if you think your spellcasters are going a little nuts by taking these, more so than they already are, you can make the major benefits for these favor martials by either lowering the amount of action points spellcasters have access to or not allowing spellcasters to use action points at all. There are some that benefit spellcasters more so than martial or even half-caster classes, and since they only scale up to about 5th level spells, spellcasters tend to lean into using their spells anyway. But something like that could alienate non-standard casting classes like the Warlock in their limited spells, so that is something you have to keep in mind as you're determining who gets to use them and who doesn't and in what capacity. Just remember to maybe go light on magic items if you see players loading up on these like crazy because they give a similar boost in power. If possible, try to give out items that don't give a heavy boost in combat because you're really going to feel it if you're giving those out on top of the exploits. But the players won't notice it because they're going to be too busy focusing on how cool they are with all the exploits they have and all the things they can do that's on their character sheet, and not because of an item that was given to them. Magic items are all well and good, but when players can engage with things that are on their character sheet because they chose for them to be there, they tend to engage with the game more and have a more enjoyable time overall. There's also the whole thing about spellcasters being able to break reality while martial characters are limited by realism. If you put these in their hands, then your players will definitely feel like the action heroes they were meant to be. The martial exploits by themselves are great for that, but there's some real flavor and spice in the other power sources. Have a look when you have the time, but be warned, there are a lot of them. You will have to do a lot of reading. Only real caveat of these documents. But that's it. That's exploits. These are the one thing that have definitely changed all of my games for the better. Those along with the talent trees really let someone dig deep and absolutely nail the character they want to make, as well as further letting them slip into roles that are generally harder to pull off in 5e, a combat healer and a bodyguard among other things. I also tend to not have dull or boring combats when there are any number of things that the enemies can pull out that the players just don't expect. If you're wanting to just drop them into your game, I recommend the trainer route. Drop a couple at a time and let interested players run them. And maybe run a couple one-shots that's focused on all of the players taking them if you want to see how well you can get the balancing for them. And so, have you used these in your games? If not, have you tried something similar by converting 4th or maybe even earlier editions abilities? How'd that turn out for you? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Another spicy homebrew topic will be out eventually. For now, I'm out of here.